So hello, everybody, and welcome to What Makes You Click, where I get to chat to inspirational people and pioneers in the field of veterinary behaviour and animal training. And I'm very pleased that this is the first UK-based person I'm chatting to tonight, Sarah Heath, who, if there's a pioneer in the UK, then I think she fits the mould really well. To say she's a pioneer is perhaps an sort of understatement. If it wasn't for Sarah, there probably wouldn't be any European college for vets in the area, and there'd be an awful lot more ignorant people as far as understanding behaviour goes. Sarah is quite a workaholic and travels all over the world, inspiring people. And we don't actually get to chat very often together at the same event, but whenever I've been chatting alongside Sarah, one of the things that always impresses me is she has a remarkable ability to translate current science into very digestible bite-sized pieces, which I find really quite inspirational, and it's a talent I wish I had. I tend to focus perhaps more on some of the fine detail. So, it is a real skill. It's a great pleasure to welcome Sarah tonight. Sarah and I go back a long way, actually, to vet school, but she was above me. But we've actually got similar histories, I guess, as far as starting off in our behaviour quest, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But first of all, welcome, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny. I'd just like to translate that word. Pioneer means old, and then also that she was above me at college. That's another she's old. So yeah.
I did take a year out, so you're only 1 year older than me, if that. I don't know. But anyway, so no, it's lovely to have you. And I know we've tried to get this date together several times, and life just intervenes, which is probably also why we don't get to chat at the same forum, because our diaries never allow it. But no. But as I said, we both started off in at Bristol, and it's surprising, actually. Well, maybe it's not surprising that quite a few behaviour people in the UK came out of that Bristol model. That Bristol.
I'm not sure that that's so surprising. I think there may be a couple of factors in there.
So what do you think? So what do you think it was? I know who my inspirations were.
Well, yeah, I always say there have been three really influential people in my journey to being in behavioural medicine, and probably one of those at uni days was Jim Pinsent. So, and that, for anyone who's listening, might be thinking, hang on a minute, Jim Pinsent was large animal, as like he was indeed. He was our large animal medicine lecturer, and he was inspirational because he talked about the art of veterinary science, and he talked about the need to be empathetic with your patients. In his case, obviously, mainly cattle work he was teaching us about, but he taught us very much that it wasn't just a science, that it's also an art. And I think that probably is the beginning of the thinking in the broader sense, maybe, about healthcare.
Yeah, he was a great one for the human side. He didn't just tell you about the diseases that cows got. He told you how to deal with farmers and to communicate with farmers. And that was one of the things, actually, that surprised me, because, whenever I do these things, I don't script them, but I do ask people to provide me with a brief bio. And I didn't realize just how much you'd worked in large animal work and for how long.
Yeah.
I've always thought of you as the cat vet, but
the whole reason I chose Bristol and wanted to go to Bristol was I wanted to be a cow vet. So yeah, I went to uni to be a cow vet. That was my whole raison d'etre when I was younger. I worked on a dairy farm, and I was I'm Cheshire born and bred, and very not from a farming family at all, but from very much a farming background in terms of wanting to spend my time on farms. And as soon as I was old enough to be employed, I worked on a local farm and worked there all the way through my uni days as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jim and about the art, and this is something which I actually find quite interesting. And in fact, at the moment, I'm trying to write a paper about it, because one of the things that is, there's been this great surge in evidence-based medicine, but one of the problems with that is it's very reductionist, and it favours the physical interventions of a certain type, because they're the ones that you can do certain types of studies on. And it's not very good when it comes to the complex interventions. And I know in the human field, this is one of the kickbacks, that actually evidence-based medicine is not, takes the clinician's skill out of it if you're not careful. And, just because something works at a population level doesn't mean it works at the individual. And when we're dealing with problem behavior, that is the science of the individual.
Oh, yeah, very, very much so. Yeah, so I think it is. Yeah, I guess that's ironic that Jim was so influential in my thinking as a student, that he was very much teaching us about more herd-based medicine and more population-based medicine and those sorts of things. But he always managed to bring it to the individual despite that. And I agree, he talked about the human involvement, the caregiver involvement, in his case, obviously the farmer, but I think he also did have an understanding, or gave us an understanding, of individuality in the animals as well, which I think was, really important.
Yeah, and the other thing about Jim is he spent a long time in practice before he became an academic. And, you and I both, spent time in general practice. And I think it's so important to have those clinical skills and test them out in the real world before you start to specialize in anything. I don't know.
I mean, I'm a clinician through and through. I'm still a clinician. I still spend a huge amount of my time doing clinical work, and I'm basically a clinician. Yeah, I've sort of branched into being involved in research and academia and those sorts of things, and obviously teaching, which I love. But at the end of the day, I'm a clinical vet.
Yeah, and you still get the people saying to us, "So don't you miss being a real vet?" I'm thinking every case I see has to be evaluated as a vet. But that's not. I wouldn't say that. I mean, although we've been saying that, I think since we've been saying anything about behaviour, I don't know that it's fully been understood, but I get a feeling that it's starting to change. I don't know about you, that people are becoming more aware of those medical aspects and thinking about it.
Yeah, I think so. I think as we get more and more published papers as well, more discussion in webinars and CPD about the link, as we teach vets at undergraduate level about this health triad and how physical health and emotional and cognitive health can't be separated, how they influence one another. If we're teaching the next generation of vets to think in that more broad way about healthcare, I think obviously that is also going to have quite an effect as that works through into the profession.
That's the thing I like, because I do the lectures at Nottingham, and the stuff I do on elimination problems is part of the urinary system module. I just it's invisible, and that's what it should be, because a lot of it is, and I start with the story of, you got the diabetic cat, you've treated the diabetes is fine, now the owner wants the cat put to sleep because it's still peeing around the house, and that's why you need to know about behavior, because you can solve the medical problem, but that doesn't mean the behavioral aspects of it necessarily go away.
Yeah, and we get those students as well to think about that interplay, so that we talk to them about, what are the physical diseases that could influence the emotional responses of this pet, and then the emotional responses give you a behavioral output. Could that behavioral output have medical consequences? And then it has a physiological output, and can that have medical influences? So try to think about it at those three levels. So not just that there's a link between behavior and physical health and emotional health, but actually how that works, and the fact that it can work in both directions, and also that emotions can create behavioral responses that have health implications. So if you've got a cat that's fearful and anxious in a multi-cat household, and because of that it can't reach its water, can't get access to its water resource, and it's a predisposing factor for renal disease, well, that's a link between the emotional situation for that cat and its health. Or the dog that bolts from fireworks and runs across a main road and causes an RTA and gets injured, its physical health is impacted by its emotional health and its behavioral response. So there's a link there. And then there's a link if it affects their physiological state. So if they've got changes in mucosal integrity and they've got GI disease or those sorts of things, but they can also have neurological disease that creates an emotional response because it involves the limbic system. So it's kind of that three-way mesh.
And I find owners really get this, but sometimes it's the vets who don't. And we're both vets, and it is perhaps terrible indictment to say that sometimes they just don't seem to get it. And I don't know why, because as I said, owners can relate to it.
Yeah,
Thoughts on
I
that?
do try to be optimistic and positive about the profession as well. But I do think it has improved. I mean, I started in behavioural work a long time ago, going back to being old. And at a time when vets just didn't do it, it was very much a non-veterinary field. And I honestly think the profession would have liked to have put me in a straitjacket and put me in a padded cell at that stage, because they were sort of saying things that were pretty controversial, that were not thought of as being veterinary work, thought of as being outside of the profession. And look how far we've come. We've both got fellowships at the Royal College, because of our work in behavioural medicine. So things have moved a long way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it was because when, we had to do rotations, and so as a student, I wanted to do more behavior work. And I've got to come back to, I mustn't forget, you said there were 3 people, and we talked about Jim, and I'll find out who the other 2 are in a minute. But we could do 2 weeks of specialist rotation. And when I said I wanted to do behavior, and there were these people in the States that I could visit, I was told that if I did 5 weeks of behavior work in the States, that was the equivalent of 2 weeks veterinary specialism. So that's, whoa. But well, I spent 5 weeks in the States. Let's put it that way. Whether I spent 5 weeks doing the specialism, I'm not sure. But
well, I know the sorts of people you were with, so I know you didn't spend 5 weeks doing the specialism.
Well, in Dunbar, we ended up just digging his garden. I said, why do you think that somebody would come halfway around the world to come and visit you and be happy digging in the garden? He said, anyone who goes halfway around the world before their finals is getting away from it. So, typical thing. So who are the other 2?
Okay, so the first one was a man called Len. I told you I worked on dairy farms when I was younger, and he was the stockman that I worked closely with at the farm. And he was the first person who talked to me about animals being individuals. He very much, all the cows were thought of in what I would now term emotional terms. I don't think Len used that sort of language back then, but we're talking, over 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And he was working then in a world where the cows were very much seen by many people as machines, and he very definitely did not see them like that. And it was actually interesting because when I went to Bristol, of course, I think one of the influences at Bristol for all students was the fact that Webster was there and was talking, had just written the book and started talking more about welfare in a livestock sense, and that was quite new at that time. And I remember being in a lecture that Prof Webster gave talking about animal welfare, and I'm sitting there looking at people who are going, gosh, that's amazing, and I'm thinking, Len's always done that. Yeah. That's what I thought dairy farming was about, because that's my experience of it when I was a teenager and working on the farm. So I think he was hugely influential in the way I thought about non-human animals at that stage.
My dad always used to have an expression which I think was a really good one, and it was never overestimate somebody's intelligence or underestimate their wisdom. And I just thought, yeah, and he said, you might assume that people understand technical terms or whatever, and it's a big mistake to always do that. And likewise, it's a really big mistake to underestimate somebody's wisdom, because these stockmen who literally lived with their stock, they were so observant, and they had to be, because that's the only training that they had.
Yeah,
but they were completely immersed in it as well.
I remember sitting in the cubicle shed with Len for hours, just discussing why a particular cow would not go in a particular cubicle, and him looking at airflow and draft and the height of the step and the sort of the bedding, and then I went to uni and people were talking about this as if it was revolutionary, and I was like, what? I thought all stockmen did that. So, yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah. And number 3 then?
And number 3 was my first boss. So I went into mixed practice, 70-30, large, small, because obviously that's what I thought I was going to do with my life. And Peter Waite was my first boss. And when I got there, he had already started using the services of David Appleby. So David Appleby came into the practice once a week to do behaviour cases. And so my interest in welfare and livestock welfare and wild animal behaviour, I've always been a complete cheetah nut as well, been interested in wild cat behaviour and those sorts of things. So suddenly this sort of started coming together in a small animal context, a little bit started by Roger Mugford giving us that one day we had at Bristol, talking about companion animals. And in that presentation from Roger, I remember thinking, gosh, this is interesting, because I still wasn't really small animal orientated at that time, but certainly starting to think, gosh, it applies to them as well. And we hadn't really thought about that angle. And then Peter, as I say, I got into my first job, and there was this man coming in to do behaviour cases. And so I started using my half day on a Monday to sit in with David. So that's how I started. So obviously I owe a great deal to David Appleby as well.
Yeah, I'll have to reach out to him and see if he'll do one of these as well. But yeah, the thing that struck me, because I remember, that we have that afternoon with Roger Mugford, and I went to see practice with him and stayed with a friend. I remember it was over the Christmas period. But the thing that struck me quite early on was, we were being taught all this stuff on nutrition in cows and pigs. And we had Sue Long, I think, for 2 hours on nutrition in cats and dogs, and the same and with the behavior stuff. And I was just thinking, this is the only bit of animal management that we're getting in small animals. And it just, to me, just struck me as such a big hole. And and there were clearly, obviously, well-meaning owners, and people just seem to assume that because people love their pets, therefore their welfare was good, therefore we didn't need to get taught about it.
Yeah, so I think it was a long time really before companion animal welfare really started to take its place. So if you look at the time differential between when Fork and Cork came into existence, it shows you that farm animal welfare was obviously, all the Bramble Report and all the rest of it, very much at people's forefront of people's minds. And say Prof Webster's work when I first went to Bristol, but it was a long time really before companion animal welfare was talked about in similar terms.
I just wonder how much of that was because sort of maybe, I don't know, there wasn't a lobby, whereas with farmers there was a lobby about concern about the welfare. There was no sort of lobbying force against, the companion animal saying this is what the issues. I mean, obviously since then, the rise of concern over brachycephalics in particular, and you think in just the time we've been vets, how many more generations inbred the pedigree dogs are. And okay, I've not done general practice for years, but well over 25 and more. And we were taught about certain problems being more common in certain breeds. And I was chatting to somebody who didn't graduate that long ago, and they were saying they're taught that in effect that if it's this breed and it's got this sign, it's got this condition unless you prove it otherwise. And I was thinking, whoa. But that's where we've sort of got to, and
it was like,
oh, we are getting old. But that's I mean, both of us have a real interest, I know, in the involvement of pain in problem behavior. But whereas we refer everything back to the referring vet, you've actually set up a pain clinic as part of.
We have. We did that a few years ago now. I think because of the fact that we found the communication difficult going back to referring vets to talk about pain, particularly chronic pain that can be so difficult to diagnose. So we started doing our own in-house chronic pain management as well, and worked very closely with Matt Gurney, who's a fellow of the Royal College and also a specialist in anaesthesia and analgesia, and owe a great deal to Matt for everything he's taught me about chronic pain management. And certainly as a practice, we've benefited hugely from his input as well. So we set up, and also the other person is Gwen Covey-Crump, actually, who also is another person I spent a lot of time with. And then I started going to more of the AVS type events. So I went over to America a couple of times with Gwen and people like that, Louise Clark and other anaesthesists who were also interested in chronic pain, and started spending a lot of time with them, and also learning more about how we could set up our own pain clinic. So yeah, so we have a chronic pain facility here as well. We treat our own or our cases for chronic pain. And then more recently, my head rehab trainer is now doing her master's in veterinary physiotherapy. So we'll have a physiotherapist on staff as well when she finishes her course, which I think is going to be a huge benefit to the clinical provision that we can give as a practice.
Yeah, I mean, we've sort of jokingly talked about whether or not we ought to rename it the Pain and Behaviour Clinic, because yeah, so many of the cases do have, and you know, and okay, I think we do see a skew because we tend to see the ones that have been to other people and they've not responded, and that is one of the sort of flags for being concerned about pain in that situation. So, you know, for a long time, I thought about you as the cat behavior person. I mean, and I don't know if it's fair to say that in your early career, that was very much your identity. You seemed to be the person who was, you know, dog was starting to take off and there were a few people doing it. And nobody much was really doing much with regards to cats, but you seem to very much move into that area. So how did that come from? How do you go from cows to cats?
Yeah. Well, as I say, I have always had a fascination with wildcats, and also as soon as I didn't live at home, where I was not allowed to have a cat, I had a cat. So from a caregiver point of view, I wanted to have cats from a very early age, and I've always been fascinated, say, with wildcats, and because I think if you're fascinated with wildcats, then cat behavior becomes a big part of that. So I have a particular love of Africa, Botswana in particular, and have done numerous visits there and safaris. I have a very close friend who runs a safari company in Botswana. And so, yeah. Give him a
plug. Give him a plug.
Give him a plug, yeah.
If you want to go on a decent safari to Botswana, you need to go to
Early Kingfisher. So yeah, Sam is the person who owns Early Kingfisher Safaris. Yeah, it's excellent, and I can't recommend them enough. If you like tents, because it's mobile tented safari rather than the luxury side of the safari market. But I think that the thing for that is just watching and observing, hours and hours just spent watching. And it's probably one of the best things you can ever do. But those observational skills of what animals are doing probably came from a love of wild cats. And then, as I say, as soon as I was away from home and able to own a cat, or care for a cat, trying not to use that word, owned. But yeah, I've lived with cats as companions ever since I went to uni. I haven't been without a cat as a companion since I left to go to university.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's the thing. Of everybody that I've spoken to on these podcasts, pretty much, they've all sort of, yeah, there's a common theme with it is a background in watching and an enjoyment of watching as well. And I think that's what it is, you know, that, yeah, if you watch, then you ask questions as well. Why is the animal doing that?
And I think, going back, my dad is probably one of the other most influential people in my life, and he was a very, very keen bird watcher. So I spent my childhood again sitting in hides watching birds, and that's a thing that I've come to really love again with my Africa trips, is the bird watching side of things as well. So it is an observation. It's being fascinated by what other animals do. And why do they do it? And I think that is probably the underpinning of behavioral medicine, isn't it? Why are they doing that? What's motivating them to do that? What's the reason behind it? What's their perception that's leading them to do that, whatever it is?
And I think the other thing which I find really sort of enjoyable about it is because every case is unique, there's always that mystery in every case. So you're learning something in every case, as opposed to, well, okay, it's that condition, this is how we treat it. Yeah, we know sort of from the behavioral intervention point of view what might be available, but we're so dependent on the owner and getting into their perspective and that in sort of individual side of things, you know, we're learning on that case, sort of, okay, for this client, that's not going to work.
And isn't that also the internal medic in us? that there's a little bit of, I'm definitely a medic. I was never a surgeon. I mean, I did surgery, but I'm not a surgeon. I'm a medic. And by that, I mean, I love the investigation. I love the detective work of medicine.
Yeah.
I love that in internal medicine as well as behavioral medicine. And the things I used to really love in clinical general practice was that working up the case and getting to the bottom of what was going on. And I've always been fascinated by that. So again, it's that mindset. So it's the observation and the desire to get to the bottom of things that drives you to have the patience. Like, we have a lot of people who say to us, I'm sure they say to you as well, Daniel, how do you do 3-hour consults, 2-hour consults? How do you spend that long with somebody? The time flies when you're investigating something and you're listening and you're interested in what they're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I say to the students, you know, watch the TV series House. You know House? Yeah.
I haven't. I've seen one episode.
Okay, so Hugh Laurie. So it's about this sort of fairly flawed internist, but he deals with all of the difficult cases. And what I say to the students, you know, watch the series of House, and you can say that you're actually doing something for your skills, because what makes House a brilliant clinician, he's a pretty, I'd say, flawed person and not a terribly nice person. And, you know, he's really hard on his residents and interns. But what he does is he applies the scientific method. So, you know, every time they have an unusual case, it comes in and he'll say, right, there's this sign, this sign, this sign, what could it be? And one of them says, could be lupus. Almost always somebody says, could be lupus. And then he just lays into them and says, of course it's not lupus because of this, 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 this. And he's teaching them falsification. Because a lot of medicine and vets, and I would say the way that we were taught was just about going for the evidence that supports your opinion. And that's, you know, that's the problem, is we're all subject to confirmation bias. We all go looking for the things that we want to believe are true and whatever. And the evidence that, you know, concords with that stands out. And that's what our brains do the whole time. They're looking to try and make predictions. So when something is congruent with our beliefs, then, you know, we're drawn to it. But it doesn't actually make for being a great clinician. And I mean, I have a terrible memory for facts. I really do. And, you know, when we did surgery exams, I went back to my first year anatomy because I spent so long struggling to learn the anatomy. The only way I could make sense of surgery was through that. And my father was an anatomist and a surgeon, a vet. So, you know, but I just couldn't, you know, and then once you understood the anatomy, actually the surgery on a veterinary context wasn't that brilliant. You know, it's pretty obvious. There's only one way you could get into the body without, you know, making it bleed out. But, you know, but it's that getting out of that habit of just looking for the evidence, you know, and nearly every case, you know, that comes in, the owner's saying, I think he's anxious. And this is the reason why. I'm thinking, yeah, but that could also be an explanation for all sorts of other things. You know, the lip lick. Oh, that's a sign of anxiety. It's a calming signal. I've heard about that. I'm thinking, yep, but it also occurs in a whole range of other situations. And it's that, and that's what, again, you know, that's what I love about it, is you're constantly testing, and you have to spend a day examining all the students, you know, and that's one of the things we're really looking for, is that falsification, which I think it is taught more now in at vet school, but we were sort of taught, well, it's this condition and you get these blood results, you know, you're looking to just confirm it. Here's the sign, do the blood test and that will confirm it. And thinking, yeah, that's not quite right. And it's just, you know, and I think that's what, makes the cases so interesting at that level, that you're constantly...
One of the things that you were just saying before about my cat bias, I think we need to set the record straight there, that I actually have always worked with dogs as well. And I was just conscious then that I was just said about my cat ownership. I have always owned dogs as well, but not all the time, because my life hasn't always been conducive to owning a dog. So I've always had a cat, but not always had a dog. But certainly we do, you know, I do have a bias towards cats. In terms of emotionally, I have a bias towards cats, but I love dogs too. And a lot of our work, I mean, our practice work is very dog orientated, and it is for me as well. So it's not, I know I got a reputation of being cats, but it was never exclusive or without dog involvement.
No, I wouldn't want to imply that either. But I think, you know, you were somebody that, you are somebody, not were, you are somebody who has helped to fill that void in the same way. Well, you know, it was a guy in our year who did the first PhD on cat analgesia in the country, you know, Duncan Lascelles. And, you know, and, you know, cats were going from, people were starting to wake up to the fact that cats weren't little dogs. And we were very lucky. We were lucky at Bristol that we had
Tim.
Yeah, we had Tim Griffith-Jones, we had the Feline Advisory Bureau, or International Society for Feline, International Cat Care as they are,
Yes.
So yeah, and Liverpool had the same, you know, they had that feline specialist as well. So in the behavioural field, again, you know, and there's still a lot of people say, well, you can't train a cat. And you think, oh, you know, they've got a brain, of course you can train them, they learn. But there was a big void there, and you know, I think you played an enormous role in helping to fill that.
Well, yeah, thank you. And as I say, there is definitely, we often said, if you were told you could only own one species, you know, you're only allowed to live with one species, you can't have any other, an animal of any other species, just pick one, then I probably would pick a cat, but it would be only because of that. So certainly I've lived with dogs, had our own sheep and pigs, and had interaction with them, and my son's quite a rat lover, so yeah, I'm certainly not just limited to cats in terms of my professional interest or my sort of companion interest in other species as well.
I saw one of the cutest things ever the other day. Somebody posted it on social media, and it's a lady who keeps rats, and she makes miniature teddy bears for her rats, and there's just pictures of it curled up hugging its little teddy bear or holding it.
They are the most amazing.
It is just so cute.
Underestimated pet. They're absolutely, yeah, but they're amazing. I love them. They are fantastic to interact with.
So I mean, there's so much that we could talk about various things, but one of the things which I'm very proud of, and I know, well, I believe you are too, is when we not only were we involved in setting up what is now the British Veterinary Behaviour Association, but from that came the first International Veterinary Behaviour meeting. Yeah. And you know, it's sometimes surprising for people to hear that, yeah, late 90s was the first time. It wasn't the first time vets from different countries had got together, but it was the first time everyone was given an equal platform. And you know, I can remember, you know, sitting in some of those hotel rooms in Birmingham, and we were going through and we're saying, right, we want to invite Johannes Odendahl from South Africa. We want, you know, we want to bring in people from here, there and everywhere. We'll bring Kirsty Sexel, you know, these people that, I mean, you may have met them. I hadn't met most of them. Some of them I had, you know, but we just thought, right, let's bring them in. We'll find sponsorship to pay for their tickets. And that has really become such an important event, I think. And I would say it's, you know, it's amongst my greatest academic achievements to get that thing kicked off.
Yeah, I honestly think, as you and I as co-founders of that event, I think we both feel very strongly about it as an achievement for the field. It was an incredibly important moment. I remember it wasn't without its challenges, was it, Daniel? No. It was a challenging event to put on, and I remember, you know, being there in the council house in Birmingham at that event, and bringing together such disparate characters, people from very different backgrounds in terms of how they worked in behaviour at that stage, as you say, in the late 90s. But yeah, it was an amazing event, and I think the fact that it is still going, that it's a biannual event and has kept going ever since we started it in Birmingham in 1997, it's an amazing sort of legacy, if you like, in terms of in the behaviour field. So yeah,
and I think And I think you're right. I think the really interesting thing, well, one of the things that stand out for me was it was the first time I'd heard a lot of the French speakers speak. And we are spoiled speaking English, that we don't have to learn other languages, although I've heard you speak other languages at conferences, and sort of I'm impressed that I'm terrible with languages, even though I've got a Danish wife, so I just can't learn languages. But and it was that awareness that there were different perspectives of it. And trying to find, and that's what most of my academic career, I guess, has been, trying to find a middle ground through that recognizes, like the people feeling the elephant, the blind people feeling the elephant, that everybody's clearly got part of the story. The person holding the tail describes it in one way, the person holding the ear describes it in a completely different way, and the person holding the leg in a different way. And trying to bring it all together, rather than just thinking, we were saying about some of the limits of evidence-based medicine, and just trying to get that much more holistic view. So just bringing people together. Now, I haven't thought this through. I'm thinking, I don't know the answer myself. Either, I'm going to ask you a question, whether there's any paper from the first IVBM that stood out for you, or any IVBM paper where you thought, wow.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so going back to the first IVBM, it was really early in the days of pheromone work, and as you say, it was one of the first times that Patrick Pasha and his team and people working with him had actually come over to the UK, spoken in the UK. So I think probably listening to those papers was quite fascinating. Those times, sort of before or at the beginning of the thought of commercial pheromone products. I mean, people now think that's everyday stuff, but we were still wiping the cheeks of cats with cloths in those days, not using a commercial product. And so I think probably opening eyes to the sorts of research that was going on, Patrick was doing at that time, I think probably would be quite memorable. I can think of some other interesting papers at that event. There were some interesting papers, and then I think I would look at that and then look at the Washington IVBM that we both went to in 2019, didn't we? 2019, yeah.
Yes, it's 2019, yeah.
2019. Sorry, it's been such a weird year since then. I've no concept of time anymore. But looking at how it had progressed. In terms of the site, I loved the Residence Day, particularly at Washington, the whole session devoted to residents, and it's like so exciting that we've got these young people coming through. In that case, the American College, of course, we've got our own European residents as well. We had a virtual day with them this year, where you get these residents giving their research papers. So that's what IVBM has grown into, what it's developed into. It feels good, doesn't it, to be at IVBM? I know you and I have been to all of. I missed one of them sadly in 2013, but other than that, I've been to all of the IVBM meetings and really enjoyed watching it sort of grow into the meeting that it is now.
Yeah, I have missed a couple of them actually. So I missed the Brazil one, and I missed one other. Miss Slovakia.
Right, okay.
Was that when I think maybe when my father died? I'm not sure. There was certainly a good reason why I missed Slovakia, because I was booked in for it but didn't make it. But anyway, yeah. So they are good meetings, and it's and at any conference there is a mix. And that's always the way, but I think that the evidence base is growing enormously, and there are lots of ways, and it's interesting people's observations, even if you think when people come up with their interpretations as to why something is the case, you think fair enough. But
it's important to listen to even if by listening to that it confirms your understanding of another way. it's still a valuable experience, I guess. Yeah, every day's a learning day, every day's a school day. So learning from listening to, even if what you learn is, I don't agree with that, that's still a learning process. It still means that you've put that information into your cognitive thought processes, you've chewed it over, and you may chew it over and go, no, I'm not going to go with that, but you've still learned something from that. So
yeah, and it's also it's important because, yeah, it also makes you realize that this is the way that some people see the world, and then probably not unique in, you know, in that belief. And yeah, so everybody's got their own worldview, and you think, okay, you know, I might come up against that, and you know, and I've got to think of a way of, yeah, sort of, yeah, of navigating it. But yeah, you said you didn't make, well, you did make the 2013 Lisbon event virtually. I don't think there was a dry eye in the conference. So those people that don't know, Sarah is somebody who has survived quite severe breast cancer, and you know, it's and yeah, as I said, you beamed in, and you know, everybody was so pleased. Well, I'm not sure if I can say they were pleased to see you, because I think, you know, people were, you were in the midst of your chemotherapy and whatever.
I was pretty poorly that day. I remember being determined that I would be there, but it was a struggle, certainly. So yeah, and I was one of the, I was in my dose dense chemo days as well. So I had very, very intensive chemo, because of the severity of the condition. So yeah, I was pretty poorly at that moment. But yeah, it was incredibly important to be part of it, and I was so looking forward to that event as well. Gonzalo being a, you know, very close friend, and really wanting to be in Lisbon, to be there. So it was a huge blow not to be there in person, but to be able to come in virtually and at least be present. So yeah, it was good.
I mean, I don't want to sound callous, but that experience must have changed you. Although you don't seem to have eased up on your work. that's the, I don't know. It sounds terrible, but you know, I can get away with saying it because I know you. But you know, going through something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't work for 13 months, which was a hell of a shock to the system. Although I didn't work for 13 months, that's not strictly true.
I was going to say, I'm sure you were busy doing things.
I didn't work clinically for
Yeah.
13 months because I couldn't see people.
Yeah.
I wrote a book in that time, and yeah, did a fair bit of other writing work and that sort of stuff. So of course I did work. I couldn't work for the first 6 months. I was very, very poorly, so I couldn't do anything other than sleep and vomit for the first 6 months. So yeah, that was a time, and it's an experience. I think surviving cancer is an experience, and you're not the person you were before. The one thing I have managed to do is go back to exactly the same ridiculous level of working that I was doing beforehand, having said I wouldn't. So, but you said at the beginning, Daniel, that I'm a workaholic, and as with any other addiction, my addiction to work is something that's very difficult to control. So yeah, that is true.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, well, this COVID lockdown has actually made me sort of pause and think about things. And actually, it was a book I read quite early on in the during the lockdown, and I don't know if I've got it on the shelf behind me. I often turn around and look. I can't remember who recommended it, but it's a book called Dear Life. Do you know it?
No, I don't know.
So it's written by somebody who is the daughter of a GP, and she was a journalist, and then went as a mature student into medicine and ended up in oncology. And she said, sort of, when people, you know, when people hear that she works in that area and end of life care, so she moved to oncology and then into end of life care and yeah, palliative care. People said, well, isn't it depressing? She said, actually, no, it's not, because actually when people have that sort of diagnosis, sometimes that's the first time they start enjoying life. Which I mean, I know that sounds a bit morose, but it really resonated with me for whatever reason, that you just think that Yeah, actually, and there's all sorts of stories in it. I thoroughly would recommend the book, because yeah, it's just about getting those priorities right. And you read so much about it, and I don't know what it was but this particular book, as I said, that particularly chimed within. I just thought, yeah, maybe I ought to be focusing on a few other things. You know, I've been very lucky in what I've achieved, etc., and I've still got lots of things I want to do, but at the same time, there are, just taking
Yeah.
stock of that. But
yeah, you do that. As I say, I am a bit of a workaholic, and I have slipped back into bad habits of working, and those sorts of things. But I think the cancer is an interesting journey, is an interesting challenge. But the other thing, and I'm sharing this with people, is that as part of the cancer journey, as I was in the second year I had 2 years of treatment, and when I was in the second year of treatment, I actually had a major depressive episode. And so I think having a serious bout of depression has a really changing effect on you, and certainly that has, whether it's been more profound the effect on me than the cancer, I'm not sure, but certainly I think together, as an experience, they do have an effect on the way you consider things, and getting enjoyment out of the things that I do have life outside of work, although a lot of the things I enjoy outside of work are animal related, just because
that's okay. I mean, I like doing photography, so you know, I like taking pictures as well. But yeah, it's okay. And I think that's the important thing, is it's switching into something else that is quite important. That you've got a busy mind. You've got to keep that busy mind busy.
Yeah. Lying on a beach is not my style,
no.
And it never will be. So yeah.
No, and I think I'm the same. So there's things I want to do, but I don't want to. I think it's more about taking control of your life and setting your own deadlines. If you can do that, then actually it doesn't become as stressful. You know.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely a work in progress, as probably most of us are.
Yeah. But anyway, so I mean, amongst your other achievements, setting up ESVCE, European Society, the European College as well. We've got diplomats, and do you know how many new diplomats we got in December? I think I know of 3 that passed. Ooh. I don't know how many. I think
I don't know the final number actually. I know we had. Did we have 6 candidates?
I think it was 6. I seem to recall
it was 6 candidates. So yeah, I must admit I haven't got the latest news on that. I knew about Kevin, obviously, and delighted to have him joining to the diplomats. It's excellent. So I knew that there had been successful candidates, but I don't know the numbers this year.
So I know Kevin passed. I know Maya Brem passed, and I think it was an Italian that passed as well, I heard. So I mean, you say you love teaching, and I think it's that certainly comes across in your teaching as well. I mean, when did you discover that passion for teaching? Because the first time I had to give a talk at an international conference was at BSAVA, and because it was over the Easter time, I was so ill, I got the university to check the water system. I was absolutely convinced I picked up cryptosporidiosis.
Oh my goodness.
And it cured immediately after I'd given my last lecture. It's amazing.
Wow.
I also discovered, though, that penicillin has anxiolytic properties as well, which is an intro there. But anyway, I mean, have you always enjoyed teaching from the outset?
Yeah, I have always enjoyed it, and had the sort of opportunity to be able to develop it. So I started more sort of giving talks at conferences, and then have moved more into teaching of students and small group teaching and course teaching and those sorts of things. And then in 2019 I did my postgraduate certificate in veterinary education at the RVC, because I wanted to kind of and did the fellowship of the Higher Education Authority, those sorts of things, so that just to put my teaching into a more sort of formal level, because I've taught for a very, very long time, but until then didn't have a formal qualification in teaching. And I think that was important. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time, but not being able to get any support from where I was teaching to actually do anything about it. So then in 2019 decided to bite the bullet and pay for it myself and just do it. So yeah, it's been good to do that.
So what were the best tips you learned on that course? Because I got my fellowship with the higher education. We had to do it via portfolio. So I didn't do the taught element, although we had lots of seminars and things like that. And I just wonder, sort of having done it properly, what makes a good teacher? I've still got a few years left. I might be able to learn something.
But no, it's a really good course. I really enjoyed it because it is learning the theory behind what you do naturally. So actually understanding the psychology of learning, the human element of how the human brain works, how you process information, how memories are formed, how different ways of processing information can favor learning in different individuals, all that sort of real theory of how people learn and therefore how you can teach. I loved it. A lot of the time I was reading papers and preparing for essays and things, and they, oh, this is what I've always done, and now I know why it works. Now I know why that is a good thing to do. Also putting some terminology to things, I think that was quite interesting, because I was like, oh, I never knew it was called that.
Pedagogical, that's always a good one.
Yeah, and all this idea of this sort of, when you break into small groups, how you formulate your small groups and who you put with who, and what sort of dynamics you have in teaching, and all the, they've all got names, they're all called something. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I just do that because it works, and now I know that actually the reason it works is all this sort of theoretical psychology behind it, and the sort of science of education, which, yeah, it was fascinating. It was a really good course, and I enjoyed doing it. Yeah.
So to me, as I said, I used to get petrified talking, and I still get a little bit nervous, and I think that's not a bad thing for me, because it encourages me to try and do better the whole time, and that's just the way that I work. But the thing that sort of for me was that there were two things that were a turning point. First of all, somebody saying, well, if somebody's willing to pay for you to go to another country to talk, they'll either believe that you're brilliant, that if you screw up, they'll probably still believe you're brilliant, and they just can't understand you. I was like, that just took so much pressure off me to think that, okay, so and I have to admit that probably wasn't. But the other thing, which was really important to me, is we were given a lecture or some seminars by the drama school. And they basically said, being a lecturer is a performance. And I could click with that, and it is. And it's, going back to the lockdown, yeah, it's a real shame not to be in front of the students. Now, the teaching that we're doing at the moment, I think the students it's what it's done is it's forced me to pre-record everything, partly because my internet here is so unreliable. I'm not going to say anything about tonight, but I pre-record everything, and so we spend the live sessions then exploring what I've actually said as opposed to delivering it. And I think that has given them a better experience. It's given them a chance to explore for themselves, which again is much more what education should be. We used to go to lectures and come out of a pharmacology lecture with 12 pages of notes, drug side effects, etc. And I've never been able to remember all of that stuff. And that's actually, I started going to psychology lectures because I thought I can just photocopy somebody's notes. Because there's nothing intellectual, it's just factual. Could just have bought a book, I guess, and not even bothered. But it's so, I think from that point of view, them having the pre-recorded material and the chance to explore it. But I do miss being on that stage, having fun and getting the feedback of the smiles.
I miss the small group teaching the most. I miss getting to know the students and spending time with them on a smaller group stage. I really miss that. But no, I think one of the things, you're the same as me, Daniel. My working life, obviously I'm hugely clinical, and then my other side of my working life is the international lecture circuit. And I think the thing about that is that it was also hugely sort of involved with our social life as well. So we went to the conferences, worked hard, but then also had dinners and time with our international friends. I desperately miss my international friends who I now haven't seen for over a year.
Well, that's why I'm doing these, because I'm missing those conversations, you know. This is the first time we've had a chance to chat with, because we would have probably met up at one of the conferences by now.
At the end of the day and have a chat and get, absolutely. So I think that's something I had one, not obviously for a podcast like this, but a Zoom call with Claire Rusbridge, who's also a close friend, but we also do a lot of work together. We've worked together a lot, and obviously Claire being a neurology specialist, and we had a Zoom call the other night with just actually she sent me an invite to it. It said let's pretend we have a life was the name of the Zoom call. She's a workaholic too, but it was good to just sit and chat, and we said this is what we normally do in the evenings at the end of a conference. This is what we spend the conferences, we speak together, and then we have this time, and this is what we've really missed in these COVID times.
Yeah, and I think that's and we know we are very privileged, the fact that we can travel it and all that, and it is a lot of work, and whether it be on the academic side or, as I said, the communicating and just the sort of getting things into digestible bites, and it does take a lot of work, because you're going to give a day's seminar at a weekend. There's a lot of preparation that still goes into that, but it's still a great privilege, I think.
But now in COVID, we're doing all that preparation, we're giving it, and then we have none of the benefits.
I know.
There's none of the travel, none of the social, none of the being with the people we enjoy being with, just sitting in front of a computer at home with all of the same work, all of the same preparation time, etc. But none of the positives of it.
Maybe that's why I've reappraised things during COVID. Who knows? So, I mean, the other thing you've been heavily involved in is the Blue Dog Project, which is the dog bite prevention program. And so maybe not everybody knows about that. So perhaps it's good to say a little bit about what it is, those people who don't know. I know my colleague Kirsten Meintz at Lincoln, she's been doing some of the evaluative work on that as well in young children. But do you want to say a little bit about that and how you got into that?
Yeah, well, the Blue Dog is the brainchild of my dear friend and colleague Tini de Cooster. So Tini is a specialist in behavioural medicine based in Belgium. She teaches at Ghent University, and obviously I've been friends with Tini for a very long time. Our children sort of grew up together. We used to go on holidays together with the kids, and it was her brainchild. Where she was very much involved in a multidisciplinary group in Belgium at the time, looking at dog bite prevention with some human medics and some plastic surgeons, and people involved in dog bite prevention from a very multidisciplinary point of view. And then got to know a lady called Sabria, who was an art student. She was a graphic student, and she was really interested in dogs as well. So it was kind of it was combining her skills to design the Blue Dog. So we had this idea of creating a dog bite prevention program for small children, looking at ways that we could use storytelling to communicate with small children. So we're looking, the Blue Dog Project is about 3 to 6 year old children. So it's very much, and that was because there was a bit of a hole there. The Kennel Club at the time already had, I think it was called Safe and Sound at that time, but they had a program for teenagers, or I think it was 8 years and upwards, but there was nothing specifically for the younger child to try and educate them as to how to live safely with dogs. And it started off as very much as a dog bite prevention program, and as we worked on it, we came more to the opinion that we wanted to market it more as a live safely with dogs program rather than dog bite prevention. And I think that's quite a subtle difference, but an important difference. And one of the things that we got involved with was getting advice about accident prevention. And that was a fascinating period, really, because we got lots of papers from ROSPA and Royal Society for Prevention of Accidents and people like that, and really learned a lot about how you don't give information if you want to prevent accidents, and this idea that no one's going to take a program about dog bite prevention because they don't believe their dog will ever bite. And so the way in which you actually present this information, not just for the children, but also for the parents who need to deliver that information, was really important. So yeah, so the Blue Dog Project was born, and then because I guess we're coming at it as scientists who believe in evidence as well, we got Teeny got in touch with Kirsten at the University of Lincoln, who was working in working with young children of the right bracket, so the right age that we wanted to look at, and was really interested in actually evaluating this program. So it was one of the first of these sorts of programs that actually went through some scientific study to look at, does it actually make a difference? It's a nice thing to do, and it's a pretty story about a dog. Blue is an interesting dog because he's very caricatured, but he's actually created on the advice of sort of child psychology and what is relevant to children, what children see. And that was also quite fascinating, learning a little bit more about how you can check, create things, and how the visual imaging is so important to children of that age. So then Kirsten got involved in actually doing some of the evaluation, and yeah, I'm now chair of the trust, and Teeny obviously still very much involved. We are at a little bit of a watershed with that product because we had it developed into an app, because obviously the CD is a bit of a dinosaur product now. Unfortunately, we need to move on, and if anyone who's listening to this podcast happens to be a multi-millionaire who doesn't know what to do with their money, then we very much appreciate some backing, because we are struggling at the moment, and the Blue Dog Project is going through a little bit of a difficult time. We still have CDs available, but with the app, unfortunately, the app store where we were actually creating it, it's all been bought out by some multi-million-pound conglomerate tech company who is not very sympathetic towards small projects, and has whacked a great big bill on making any more progress with the app. So we desperately need investment in order to be able to bring it into the 21st century, into that technological development. So yeah, so if anyone's listening who's got a spare bit of cash, would like to support a project on supporting children of 3 to 6 living safely with dogs, then do give me a call.
And I think that's a really interesting point. And you say it went from dog bite prevention to living safely with a dog, and that is such an important shift. It seems like a small thing, but and I'm sure it was I can't remember, it was a talk by Teeny or whether it was one of these in the bar afterwards, and she was telling me that in the sort of 90s with the AIDS epidemic, there were all these adverts that failed to sort of have any impact, telling you about AIDS is coming and it's going to kill you if you're not careful. And because as soon as you tell people that sort of horror story, they just, it's not going to happen to me. And, or they just put up their defenses and find some way to move out of it. And she said that the most effective advert was one which wouldn't be allowed nowadays. And it was this woman lying in a bath full of condoms saying, "Come on in, boys." And it was trying to, but it was that sort of, you can still have fun, but you got to be safe about it.
Yeah.
And it was, and that's the one that actually woke people up to, both the risks, but also the solution as well. And again, there's so much in the behavior field where people focus on the downside. And it's something I'm increasingly trying to say to our students, and do with the clients, that, they're coming with a problem. You've got to make it into something positive for them. And you've got to take them on that journey with you and sort of explain to the client that here's a great opportunity to learn more about dogs. Your other dogs that you've had which have been fine, etc. Yeah, they were a lot of fun, absolutely. But here's a dog you can really learn something from. There's a great opportunity here, and just turning that from, yeah, a problem to an opportunity for the client. And I think it's so important in the whole issue of behavior change.
Yeah, I guess that's the other way in which our field has grown so much, is understanding more about this human behavior change, and the organization that Suzanne Rogers and C. Wyatt do, the Human Behavior Change for Animals organization, is a fascinating group, and they do some amazing work. And I think our field has benefited hugely by communicating with them and learning from them, because human behavior change is such a massive part of what we do, and we can't achieve what we need to for the patient, for the non-human animal, unless we can work with human behavior change. So yeah, I think that's a way in which our field, I think, has really developed.
Yeah, and it's something which I've got much more interested in recently as well, because yeah, you can have the greatest solution in the world, but if you can't get the owner to change it. In fact, I've actually recorded a whole new series of lectures for our students for this coming semester on this, because it's, yeah, you know, and you read the books and they say, well, this is what the owner needs to do. But, you know, very few owners can implement a desensitization and counter conditioning program without an awful lot of support and preparation in place, because they're not trainers, you know. And yeah, as I said, but just the whole concept, the case I had last week, actually, my colleague that I was seeing it with, she sort of sent me a message on Friday, and she said, thought you'd like to see this before the weekend. And it was just an email from the client just saying, I am so glad about the consultation because now I've got hope. And I was thinking, good, that's what I want out of the first consultation, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, I actually said to it, you know, we're not going to talk about the behavior therapy side of things because we've got other things we need to get sorted and whatever. But I just wanted to get her from, you know, she was being weighed down by the issues of this dog, but now she could see that there were opportunities, and she saw how she could get enjoyment out of the dog again. And I think, yeah, that's good. I like my job. You know, it's nice to do that. And rather than just, it's not about, it's not prescribing. It is about, as we said right at the start, you know, it's about finding what works with that person. And we can always be improving and learning, and you say, and then you read something and think, oh, there's some theory behind this.
It's always nice to have a theory behind it. But sometimes it comes that way rather than the other way.
So I'm going to ask you this. So I do try to use humor in my consultations, partly because, and it does sometimes backfire. And I know they say that you shouldn't, whatever, but I am trying to create that positivity. And I just wonder, do you, I'm not sure I've ever seen you consult. Maybe I should come and see practice with you. So, I mean, do you try? Yeah, okay. Because I mean, I often say to owners, if I think it's the right pitch, and it doesn't work with everybody, but if you've got a dog, you've got to have a sense of humor, or, you know.
You have to tailor how you present your information to your client. But yeah, and I think also very much a human element as well to the consult, and an honesty as well. So give me examples of things and experiences, and listening to not just what is directly relevant to the animal, but what is relevant to the system. I remember Claude Beata talking when I used to go to Morzine I used to go to the French.
That's what I mean. You can speak the languages, so you've done the courses in French.
I did used to go to the courses in France on a fairly regular basis that Patrick and Claude were running at in those days. And one of the things that Claude has always talked about is the system, you know, is the family system, and the fact you can't take the animal out of the human environment that it lives in, and you have to work with with everything. And a lot of those courses in Morzine, we used to do role play and you know, being clients and being clinicians and doing that. How do we both get the information but also convey the information. And I think humour definitely is part of that, and finding common ground, and picking up on little cues. That's what I've really missed in lockdown, is that when you're doing a house visit, we do 98% house visits normally, and the one thing I've really missed is the fact that you pick up on things as you're driving to the house. You're looking at the environment from the dog's perspective. So is there a school, is there a shop, is there a bus stop outside, all those sorts of things. But also you're getting a feel for the environment that client's living in. And then when you're in the house, you notice things. So, I'll notice if they've got a LFC mug on the side, or if they've got, if there's a picture of a place you recognize, or there's something there. You pick up those little things that are just about the person and about their life, and it gives you an ability to have some kind of rapport with them on a level that creates a relationship, and then enables you to be able to communicate more readily for the actual science of the consult, if you like.
It's interesting you mentioned the French meetings, because we talked about IVBM when it was first time. A lot of people had heard the French approach, and we talk about, if people aren't familiar with what sort of we call the French approach, it's not, it's not just us being Brits talking about the French. There was a whole culture of the way that you do behaviour, which was epitomized by Patrick Pajar's book, which was very reductionist and medically focused. And you had Karen Overall in the US adopting a similar sort of thing, but in no way, I think, was it as comprehensive as the French approach, which his book is basically a codex of, this is the condition, these are the signs and whatever. And it's bizarre because I can't speak the language, but I was involved in translating it into English. And somewhat bizarrely, I was told that the reason why they didn't publish it in English is one of the reviewers, who I do not know who they were, said it would be dangerous if this book appeared in English. And so Blackwell's wouldn't produce it after I translated it with a colleague who was a French translator. I did some of the technical stuff, really, so he did all the hard work, but the technical words are just the same, just sort of take the E off the end. I can do that sort of level of French translation. But so there they are, very reductionist and sort of quite prescriptive. This is the way that it is, and they use a lot of medicine, but at the same time I think they were streets ahead of most people when it came to that the idea of the system and working with the clients, so whilst they were very focused, and probably well, there's still drugs that I would probably never prescribe. I wouldn't have the confidence to prescribe that they talk about in the book, some of the antipsychotics and stuff. But at the same time, they really went to town about the importance of working with you can't just change the animal, the whole system's going to change. And I think that was, to me, one of the things that perhaps jumped out quite a lot in that first IVBM as well. Some of the French speakers.
Certainly in the Morzine type, these residential courses that we did in France, that was very much the emphasis was the communication side of it, the actual consulting skills side of it. And absolutely, I learned some really valuable stuff on those occasions. So they were good courses.
So on that side, you say you learned some good things. Tell me, share me.
Well, it was stuff that probably now people would see as being fairly mainstream. So non-judgmental attitudes, and how you allow the person to deliver information before making any kind of comment about anything, because you close doors, and about involving all family members. This is now I'm talking. When did I go to Morzine? Gosh, that's probably at least 25 years ago that we were doing those courses. So now this wouldn't be revolutionary stuff. It would be the sort of thing that human behaviour change for animals are talking about all the time. I remember, I think Claude giving a presentation at one of those workshops about contemplation, pre-contemplation, the wheel of change, and stuff that I'd never heard that before. Whereas, but I say, it was a long time ago, and it was quite new at that time to talk in terms of human psychology, particularly to vets, to be listening to stuff about human psychology and how you communicate with humans to get the best information in a history-taking sense. we now vet students get communication skills lectures at undergraduate level. We didn't get anything like that.
We had Jim Pinson.
Oh, Jim, yeah. Good old Jim.
We
Yeah,
come
he
back
did.
to Jim.
He did. Yeah, he did. But we weren't formally taught, were we?
No.
Any communication skills or anything really? History taking was just a process. It wasn't a dynamic interaction with your client. It was just a process of this is what you need to know. Make sure you've got this checklist type approach to history taking. And so I think what I came across in Morzine was a very different human approach, human psychology based approach to consulting, really.
And to be honest, I think you say sort of, well, it's old hat. I don't know. I'm not convinced that it is well taught, even amongst behaviourists nowadays. I mean, maybe, I know you taught on the Southampton course, and obviously a number of psychologists there, so maybe there was a big emphasis on that. But I don't know how much those skills are taught. And whether because
it was a big part of the course at Southampton, that side of stuff.
But I just wonder how, because I do think, people are sort of, they're talking about the science and saying, oh, this is what the client needs to do. And I don't hear that much spoken about. Yeah, there are obviously, there's exceptions, but it's not, to me, it is such an integral part of problem behavior management. As I said, the theoretically brilliant treatment program is absolutely useless if it can't be implemented by the client. So it's got to be part of it. And as I said, I've been rewriting those lectures, and we've expanded that part of the clinical skills, because it is, you can know how to do it, but it's not about, it's about getting as I say, the client to change. Even if it's just changing of attitudes, you've still got to get some change.
Yeah, I don't know if you've attended the HBCA, Human Behaviour Change for Animals organisations workshops, any of those. They did one in Exeter. It was absolutely brilliant. And just spending that time doing those workshops and learning, again, more skills in terms of how you change, how you're going to get this message across. This is what you want this person to do. And, examples of not necessarily directly in the sort of work that I'm doing, but learning more about those skills. And then I did also a university course at Derby. Derby University Psychology Department have got to do a lot of work on interventions in terms of consulting, mainly for medics, but they do let us vets go as well. So I did a course there on motivational interviewing, which I found, again, fascinating and incredibly useful for the work that we do. So yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities to educate ourselves on those more the other skills that we need, as well as the skills that we need in actually diagnosing the process within the animal, but also how we do our job and get that information and impart information.
So you mentioned the Human Behaviour Change for Animals, and I was contacted by them a while ago, but I hadn't heard anything. So I will look them up again. And again, anyone listening to this, if you recommend it.
Great organisation, and they have some online courses which are really good, very well worth doing. So yeah, it's an excellent organisation.
Well, So we talked about sort of the changes that have occurred sort of since IVBM and some of the changes that have happened since then. What about looking forward? What do you think of the sort of the next, I was going to say battlegrounds, it's not really the right thing, the horizons that we've got to head for? Where are the big gaps, you think, still?
I think I know you share this mission as well, because we've talked about it before, but I think my real mission for the rest of my career is to get to a point where emotional health, cognitive health and physical health are equally important in the veterinary profession's eyes, to see protection of emotional health in animals as a veterinary discipline. That's what I feel very passionately about, and I think that's probably where my focus is at this point in my career, not just in recognizing the interplay, recognize the importance of not just behavioural medicine at the clinical cliff edge where we work with the actual problems, but in general veterinary practice, understanding that those patients, as they come into that veterinary context, have an emotional response to that and a cognitive response to that. So, you know, handling techniques and sedation protocol, that's something I feel very strongly about as well. And I said before, I work closely with Matt Gurney. We worked together to produce sedation protocols for emotionally challenged pets, which we work really well, and we've publicised those a lot. And our local practices, we get a lot of feedback saying thank you so much for those sedation protocols. They made a massive difference in the way we managed that patient. And, you know, clients as well saying, gosh, my dog's had to go into the vets before, but this was a completely different experience, just because we're approaching it with that emotional consideration as well as the physical health. So I think for me, at the moment in my career, probably that promoting behavioural medicine in the veterinary profession, not in terms of referral level dealing with individual problems, but in terms of it becoming a mainstream part of all general practice veterinary practices, that it becomes the norm that the emotional health of every patient is considered.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it was one of my friends from university said to me not long after I qualified. He said one of the problems with veterinary behavioural medicine is it's become a speciality before it was mainstream. It's the wrong way around, you know. You've immediately, and you know, and I think I often think about that, and I think he was right. You know, we were doing behaviour consults from, well, you know, from the time we were at university, and you know, these were long consults and saying that, oh, you have to do these long histories. And one of the things that I'm quite keen on is that we need to make sure that vets in practice know what can be done in a 10-minute consultation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, and not think that all behavior cases need 3 hours. And it's that behavioral first aid. And I know you were saying sort of, yeah, you don't want animals being traumatized going into the vets and whatever, but I think it's something which I think is so important, but I'm also feeling that because it's so long since I was in practice, you know, and we need more people who are in the typical mixed practice, day-to-day veterinary practice, really getting to grips with this, and really getting that through, in, as I say, both in terms of handling the animal, but also the client comes in with this issue. What can you do in 10-15 minutes? Realistically, and what's a reasonable expectation of the profession? So I think we're probably once again we're coming together, but chipping away at slightly different angles of it as well.
Yeah, I think I wanted to give a plug to your course at Lincoln, but I think one of the things that has been a huge advance in the profession is advanced practitioner status, because I think it's hugely important that we don't only have specialists, but we also have advanced practitioners, because advanced practitioners may also be working more within that clinical context and have the contact with the general practice environment. So I do think that's really important. I mean, I carried on doing locum work in general practice until 2000. When
I couldn't believe that when I read. Well, I could believe it because it was written down. Because then you sent me through. Sarah very kindly sent me part of her application for her fellowship recognition. I was thinking, blimey, I didn't realise you were still.
Yeah, I was still doing general practice locums at weekends,
wow.
right up until 2000. So, and I only stopped then because I just got too busy and I just physically couldn't carry on doing it. But I mean, I love general practice. I've never left general practice because I didn't like it.
And I'm exactly the same actually. And sadly, so many of my year and above and below, you know, you see so many people who get disaffected with veterinary practice, and I think it's so sad. But maybe because they've turned it into that production line or whatever, and it's just that.
I think it's very pressured at general practice level. I think that, it's a very different world, and there are lots. It has its own pressures as well. But no, certainly my decision to specialise was not to get away from general practice in any sense. I miss general practice. So yeah, and definitely my heart is still there. And one of the lovely things about doing referral work is that you're talking to general practitioners every day, that we're discussing cases, especially because we do our chronic pain management ourselves as well. So we have that interplay. We work cases up. You know, we get involved in a lot of our cases where there is a physical health issue. We get very involved in that as well, in the diagnosis of that, which I really love as well. So we've got some, you know, great general practitioners who refer to us on a regular basis. So we have good relationships with them, and we still keep that contact with general practice as well, which is good. So yeah, I think probably my emphasis is going slightly more towards that connection with the profession as a whole, as I yeah, looking to the future and what it holds.
So, I mean, any cool research that you've heard about recently that you think that's good? Because I mean, again, you know, when we first qualified, it wasn't that difficult to have read most of the research because there really wasn't that much, you know.
But not now.
You know, yeah, you know, and
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, you know, we had to read, well, if we read things like a couple of editions of the Vet Clinics of North America and Ben Hart's book, we were pretty much leading edge. Well, I don't know if you know, this book came out this week, actually. Oops, he says. Sagi's book. Now, this is an interesting.
Oh, I haven't seen the copy. I knew it come out.
Yeah. So I said I would only write. As an author, they said they would give us an electronic copy of the book, and I said no, I'll only do it if you give me a hard copy. And I got my hard copy.
So yeah, I knew about it, but I haven't actually seen the copy yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, it's interesting because of the title. So this is Small Animal Veterinary Psychiatry. Now I know that when I got the chair at Lincoln, some of the newspapers talked about the first, you know, animal psychiatrist and whatever, and I got some interesting emails from people saying that's terrible, this, that, and the other. It's just, yeah, it's so what's your thought about that as a title, just out of interest?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I think one of the reasons I think we shied away from psychiatry when we were named, we named this discipline and named it behavioral medicine. And I think I still stand by that, in that I do believe it's a branch of internal medicine. And therefore, I do think the medicine part of it is incredibly important. I think one of the reasons in the UK, particularly, we've shied away from the use of the word psychiatry is because psychiatry is also misunderstood. So actually, if you know psychiatrists, as I do, work, you know, friends who are human psychiatrists, I know that what they do is incredibly similar to what we do. So there are huge parallels, but the image of a human psychiatrist is someone who just doles out medication, and that's all they do. And I think that is the worry, that it medicalizes the behavioral medicine to the point of a perception. I don't think it's true, because I don't think that is what psychiatrists do. I know it's not what they do. I know that they do exactly what we do, and they investigate the whole system, and that they look at it in a much broader sense. But the image of psychiatry is someone sitting in a little doctor's office handing out tablets. And I think that was what we didn't want as a perception of veterinary behavioral medicine.
Yeah.
But we suffer from not being an ology. We're not taken seriously, I think, by the profession many times because we're not an ology. But also we have that problem of the word behaviour thought of as the same as training. And so because the training world uses the same word behaviour, that does give us a problem in behavioural medicine. So yeah, and I'm interested by the use of the word psychiatry.
So I'll read you this because when Sagi approached me and asked me, and I was a little bit cautious for exactly the reasons that you laid out. And I chatted with Sagi and I said, well, you know, because he wanted me to write about diagnosis amongst other things. I did the chapter on learning principles and behavior modification. And I was thinking, well, how is this going to fit in this book? And then he said he also hit the stuff we're writing, he wanted to put into a chapter on diagnosis. And I was thinking, well, the way I do the diagnosis, I see as as different. But I just read you this, because this I thought was quite insightful. He said, this is the third paragraph on the preface. The decision to name this text veterinary psychiatry, rather than using the older and more commonly used term veterinary behaviour, stems from our growing understanding of our role. If we wish to help animals that struggle, especially within human societies, we must address their emotional and cognitive needs. There's so much what you say, isn't it? The behaviours we see and of which pets owners complain are the result of how animals feel and think, genetics and environmental influences. Even the words psyche, breathing soul, and anima, soul, are self-explanatory. As I write the words veterinary psychiatry, I know that there are those who would resist the term for different reasons. I just thought, that's, yeah, I haven't read it because, as I said, it literally just arrived this week. But it's interesting, and it's nice, because what I do like about it is there are lots of vets from other disciplines writing here. So, you know, contributors: Alison Blackster, Bristol, Alex Darville, Ed Hall, Tom Harcourt Brown, there's Lynn that I work with, who's the behaviour and training, Angie Hibbert, Kathy Hout, Jackie Lee, Samantha Linley, Sarah Liversidge, me, Carlos Syracusa, Stephen Waisglass, and Helen Zolch. And you think, yeah, actually he's done a good job to get people from other disciplines to contribute to behaviour rather than us going out to them.
I guess that what happened with the feline behavioural medicine, behavioural health and welfare book as well, that also is a multi-author book, bringing in people from other disciplines, people, you know, writing about chronic pain, people writing about internal medicine issues, nutrition, things like that, like Alex German on weight management and how it relates to emotional health. So yeah, that also was a project I was involved with Ilona Roden, where we specifically about cats, but very definitely looking at that multidisciplinary approach, and the title of Behavioural Health and Welfare was to try and pull together the welfare and also the physical and emotional health components. So I think that's a way in which we're moving as a discipline.
Yeah, I must admit, having read that little bit there, it does make me less uncomfortable about the use of the term, and I think you articulated it really well. And as I said, you're good at finding that thing. You know, I did have an unease that sort of pet shrink, I think, is, and again, it's sort of. The danger is it also demeans what we do if you're not careful with some of the but it's
talking to human psychiatrists, I think they feel that too, that their work is so misunderstood, and what human psychiatrists actually do is really not understood by the general public. They have this image of a psychiatrist, as I say, as just a pill dispenser who just talks about medicines and has no real understanding of sort of, you say, cognition and emotion, and actually the true nature of a human psychiatrist is exactly what we do, exactly the so yeah.
And I mean, I read quite a bit of stuff in the evolutionary psychiatry field, and I really like what's coming through in those areas now, where they're putting it in a much stronger biological framework as well. And you know, again, you know, dealing with clients, and it's, you know, for biologists these things are just so obvious, but in, you know, medicine doesn't always talk to biologists. It goes back to this sort of evidence-based medicine thing. You know, the hierarchy of evidence really has no scientific grounding at all for that hierarchy. But anyway, that's another rant for another day. But when you sort of explain to clients that, well, you know, it pays the brain to be primed for fear, because that's running away unnecessarily is, you know, is so much better than not running away when it was necessary.
Yeah,
and
of the latter are actually a big problem for survival. So and I think probably that's one of the other things is going, you said about what do I want for the future. I really want to get to the point where we recognize that protective emotions are useful, that protective emotions are good, that we need them, and this idea that the world should be, you know, rid of all negative emotion, that negative emotion is somehow bad, that we want to be free of fear and not have that negative protective side of emotion being triggered. I think it's really important for us to have an understanding that protective emotions are essential for life, that they, you know, when Panksepp talks about negative and positive emotions, he's not talking about good and bad, which is why in the terminology of my model, I talk about them as protective emotions and engaging emotions rather than positive and negative, because trying to get away from the potential for people to misunderstand them as good and bad emotions, because understanding that protective emotions have a place, they need to be acknowledged and recognized, and obviously unnecessary triggering of protective emotion is wrong, and we don't want to unnecessarily trigger, and that's really important. But when it is triggered and it's contextually appropriate, that we need to not kid ourselves that we, you know, are going to get rid of it, or because often what we're actually doing is just causing a temporary bias towards engaging emotions, and then people think the protective emotions have gone, and I think that's really dangerous. So yeah, I think understanding of the roles of emotions in all the systems is probably something that's really important moving the field forward.
Yeah, and it's that idea that you know, and it is becoming more prominent in the welfare field, that it's a life that was worth living, not a life of suffering, and you can have suffering within it.
Yeah.
But overall, that wasn't a bad life in the grand scheme of things. And, you know, we were saying at the beginning that, you know, neither of us are people whose idea of a holiday is lying on a beach. We'd soon get very bored with that. We want different sensations at different times. And yeah, we do have ups and downs. But overall, you know, I feel, you know, I'm incredibly lucky, and I've been lucky enough to live a very good life. And you know, I've been given a lot of fortunate breaks along that. Doesn't mean I haven't had some real downers and some real big stresses, and it's looking at that overall picture. And it always struck me as strange, you know, a couple of things about welfare is, first of all, it always seemed to be focused on let's avoid nasty things, as opposed to talking about let's make animals happy. Although the last 20 years we're starting to see much more on that positive affect, but also this idea that you could remove all suffering. And what, you know, that was sort of part of the mistake of intensive farming, was let's give them physiologically everything they need and they'll be really happy. And that's just not
it's not just about removing suffering, it's also about acknowledging that having a protective emotional experience because of a justified context is not suffering. It's biologically adaptive behavior, which is not a form of suffering. So being legitimately anxious and fearful about something doesn't mean you're suffering, because if it's legitimate emotional response, you're actually functioning really well. You're not compromised, you're actually adapting, and your behavior is appropriate to the context. So
as long as you can deal with it, that's the important thing. Yeah, no, that's the key. Yeah,
exactly. And so our emphasis is not on removing that, but on making sure that the animal can express it. We're back to emotional intelligence, which is so important. It's the ability to be aware of and express your emotions, and that's the important point for non-human animals, that they live in environments where they can express when those emotions are justified and genuine, and then be given coping strategies to deal with that, ways to be emotionally intelligent, to make appropriate decisions about how they behave in response to that.
And what's so important in that is, yeah, that the owner is seen as a reliable source of social support. They take so many by way of cues in relation to that, and getting the relationship right between the animal and their owner carer, you know, is so important. Then they can cope with things because they know you will take care of this. And I think that's, you know, you know, and that to me is why, you know, we've got to be careful at both sides of the relationship that, you know, there's obviously those, you know, training protocols or whatever, which I think are abusive, and people say, oh, well, it'll toughen the animal up. Well, A, it's unnecessary. And B, how is the animal supposed to see you as a source of support if you use those sort of punitive methods?
Yeah, and there's a difference there, isn't there? Because what you're then doing is you're providing unnecessary triggers for the protective emotions. You know, that's the differentiation I think is so important, is that unnecessary triggering of protective emotions is wrong, because then you're getting into the realms of increasing protective emotion when actually it doesn't need to be there. That there's a big difference between that and protective emotions which are contextually appropriate and justified. So yeah, I think
but at the other end, we've got the issue, which again, it's a little bit like the sort of more recent version of what we were saying, that, well, these animals are loved, therefore you don't need to know much, you know, their welfare is protected. Well, actually, when people don't see the animal for what it is as an individual and respect its individuality and just project onto it, then it becomes really confusing for the animal to know what it's supposed to do. And that in itself can be really problematic. But trying to convince owners that it's not that they need to love their animal any less, they just need to communicate their love in a way that the animal understands.
It's getting, it's like any relationship, I guess, but when it's a caregiver companion animal relationship, is that yes, love is important, of course it's important, but respect is needed. And so if there's respect and love, that's a brilliant combination. So love on its own can actually, you know, backfire, particularly between species where communication is not the same, where methods of communication and signaling are different. Then the expression of love and affection can actually become problematic towards a member of another species. But if that love is mixed with respect, so that you actually are respecting the fact that's a rabbit or a parrot or a cat or a dog, then I think that's where it becomes a functional relationship from both perspectives.
I think that's a very positive way in which to actually finish. Let's talk about respect. Although, having said that, no, well, this, you know, I called this "What Makes You Click." What makes you click? What, you know, I said you're a workhorse. What is it that drives you?
What is it that drives me? Okay.
Just out of it, I'm just being nosy.
No, what drives me, that I don't know, I guess striving for the world to be a better place. That sounds very cliched, but the connection, I think, between humans and non-humans fascinates me. Not just in a companion animal context, but in a world context as well. We talked about Africa and just having that time to just sit and watch other species. I think, you know, David Attenborough's Perfect Planet program, which probably we've all just spent Sunday nights watching. The culmination of that is really it, isn't it? Is that we're all part of a much bigger system. The human animal, I do not believe the human animal is special. I believe we're just another animal. And that therefore the interplay between us as a species and the other species we share this planet with is incredibly important to see ourselves as being part of this world of lots of different species, be they animals or plants or you know, even the phytoplankton that they were talking about on Perfect Planet. You know, that just how important it is that every single little bit niches together. So what makes me tick? Yeah, I suppose that. What gets me through life is, you know, football, as you know, and the pets I live with, the connectivity. I was speaking to somebody else actually a little while ago, saying, you know, what is it that makes people be still motivated to keep working after years of doing the same job? And I think that phrase that I did earlier of every day's a school day, but also connectivity. And I guess that's why 2020 and now 2021 has been such a challenge, because probably the connectivity part of what makes me tick is probably the bit that we've missed the most over this last 12 months.
Yeah, no, I fully appreciate that. But thank you so much for taking a couple of hours out of your very busy schedule. I'm glad we finally managed to get there. I really am. And, you know, the other thing about these series is a chance for me to say thank you to people as well, because, you know, we rush through things and life, and we pass, and, you know, we've talked about some of the things that we've done together, but you probably have no idea how much you've inspired me in the course of my career. And I just want to say thank you for that as well. So thank you. And hopefully we'll catch up in person before too long, when this is behind us. You
Yeah.
take care. Thanks a lot. Bye now.
Bye.